Guys, we've been saying how odd the weather is in Minnesota this year. Like a few days ago, it was 70 degrees and sunny, and now winter wonderland.
Frozen.
The day we wanted to film. So congratulations, you guys get to look at this beautiful scenery behind us for our very important topic today, which is pros and cons of living in the good old USA. And that leads me to my very first con. The extreme weather here, especially in Minnesota where we live. But before we get into the rest of our pros and cons, I want to mention something really quick, and that's that a lot of people leave comments asking why we only put Korean subtitles on our videos. I want everyone to know we have Korean and English subtitles for every video on our channel. I write them every week. Back when we first started our YouTube channel, we actually had Korean and English on the screen at the same time, but it was so ugly and it took up the whole video and we just didn't like it. So we formatted it so Korean is always there. And then if you click the CC button at the bottom of the video, you can turn on English subtitles and you can actually read both at the same time. So please take advantage of the wonderful subtitles. So we've already made it clear that the weather, con, okay? But a pro, kind of related, is the fabulous air quality. Take a big whiff of that air.
It's like there's no cloud at all.
No
today.
clouds. Like, I don't even think about the air quality in the US ever. Maybe when we were in LA.
Yeah, it was kind of like dusty.
Yeah, but in Korea, part of my everyday routine was I opened my phone, checked the air quality, and then determined if I had to wear a mask that day, if I could go on a walk outside that day, if it was okay to like bike, or if I should take public transportation. My life was dictated by the air quality.
아시다시피 미국이란 나라는 굉장히 커요. 저희도 직접 로드트립을 해보니까 이곳 사람들은 7시간 운전하는 거리를 가깝다고 느끼고 한 30시간 정도는 운전해야 좀 먼 장거리다라고 할 정도로 나라도 크고 미국 주가 50개 있잖아요. 그 주 하나하나가 다른 나라라고 생각하면 돼요.
And I think a lot of our US subscribers live in places like Seattle, LA, New York City, or Koreans that are coming to visit the US often visit those types of places, LA, Seattle, New York City. So when we're talking about pros and cons of the US, I want you to know that our pros and cons are based on where we live here in Minnesota, the middle of nowhere, near Canada. It's a much different environment to those major cities, so just keep that in mind. And before I get into our actual list, I want to let you know that we have so many thoughts and opinions about this. But if we shared all of those with you, this would be a 5-hour-long video and you guys would not appreciate that. So we're gonna be boom, boom, boom as fast as possible. Please add your thoughts and opinions in the comments about everything we talk about. We'll continue the discussion in the comments, but we're gonna be brief for the sake of a short enough video for you guys to actually watch. Another massive con. Going out in the US is just so gosh darn expensive. I'd say probably at least 2 to 3 times more expensive than Korea, right?
Yeah, and the quality is not as good as Korea either.
Exactly. When we were in Korea, I think we ate out multiple times per week, or we would go out and see friends or just do activities out and about. It was affordable.
Yeah.
But here,
I think you need to make quadruple to have similar experience.
Yeah, plus like if you eat out, not only is the price of the food expensive, but you also have to pay for a tip. And if you live in the city, you might also have to pay for parking. It's just, and they add a service charge now, plus taxes. So it's just too expensive. So I miss that about Korea.
고추 바사삭.
고추 바사삭. And that leads me to my next point, coincidentally, Jin.
What is it?
Cost of groceries in the US. And I have to say this is actually a pro. Americans will disagree with me because relatively speaking, prices for groceries have increased significantly in the US. However, it's still cheaper here than in Korea. I swear multiple times per week there are articles coming out of Korea about the rising grocery costs.
Yeah.
A significant article I read a couple of months ago said grocery prices in Seoul are double the cost of groceries in New York City. When we were in Korea, we started to notice that too, like fruit and vegetable prices were very expensive.
But based on your diet, it can be more expensive. For example, like if you like seafood, Korea is way cheaper and way fresher than
Yeah.
Minnesota. I don't know about Seattle or LA where
Like coastal
the-
towns,
yeah.
they might be better. You told me before in Korea, the Korean government put some restrictions on importing produce to Korea, right? In the US, we have produce from all over the world. I think that competition allows us to have less expensive produce in general. I think Jin and I, because we don't eat out and we cook most of our food and we buy in-season produce, we're saving quite a bit of money here, which is a pro. Major con about living here in Minnesota.
We're middle of nowhere, so to leave Minnesota is so expensive.
Midwesterners often say, why fly when you can drive? A huge part of that is flight tickets from Minnesota are so expensive, not including rental car, hotel, food, and other travel expenses. Traveling to another state can be a couple $1,000s on the cheap side.
Yeah, I think the U.S. rental car business is kind of scam, in my opinion. No offense, because last time we went to Seattle, we rent a car and we visited the counter. He was like, "Oh, you need to get an insurance." Like, what are you talking about? Like, I thought $50 a day is the fee, and he goes, "No, you better get a insurance."
Like the extra insurance.
Which is about the same cost.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that time was super annoying because our rental car went from like $300 to
Like 500?
$500 or $600 just because they said we need extra special insurance because if somebody breaks into the car, steals the car in Seattle, then we have to pay for the whole cost of the car. So that threat level to us, it was like, well, better for us to just, I guess, cough up the $200, $300 for the insurance.
And the rental car will probably check our car really carefully because they know that we don't have an insurance.
Oh yeah,
They're
that
gonna
too.
nitpick every single thing.
And then charge us for any
But they
tiny
did it.
damage. It's so frustrating to use a rental car, which is why we prefer to drive and just use our own car. But then you have to pay for repairs for your own car, which are expensive too. Just, you have to know travel in the US costs a lot of money. So when we make travel content, oh man, it's fun, but it ain't free. Okay, another pro about Minnesota specifically is housing costs.
Yeah.
So the average one-bedroom rental in the Minneapolis area right now is about $1,300 a month for approximately like 650 square feet. If you want to live in a city like LA, New York, or any of the other big cities, you're looking at spending double or triple that for a similar size apartment. And also, if you want to buy a house in Minnesota, the average home cost right now is about $300,000.
It sounds so cheap because I've been constantly hearing the Korean Seoul apartment. So it's like, oh, it's so cheap.
If you want to buy an apartment in Seoul, probably looking at least $750,000 to $1 million for like your basic apartment, at least from what I've seen in the news. They're saying the cost of living in Seoul is just getting so crazy. That's why many people live like in the
Satellite,
suburbs.
yeah.
But the suburbs of Seoul are so far away. People that live in the suburbs, they're commuting like 2 hours.
They're not
sometimes.
cheap anymore.
Not cheap because everybody has to live there, right? So I think we're really grateful here that we can have a much lower cost of living than if we lived in another place. It gives us a little bit more freedom to do things like travel or get our family and friends gifts or things like that.
그래서 제가 듣기로 미네소타는 이게 거주 비용, 의식주 비용이 그렇게 높지 않기 때문에 그 남은 여비로 그 여행을 많이 다닌다고 그러더라고요.
And also, I don't know about other states, I only know about Minnesota, but there are some benefits to being a renter. For example, in the state of Minnesota, you get a rebate at the end of the year when you file your taxes based on how much money you paid in rent. And also where we live, we get like a credit based on how long of a lease we sign. So between the Minnesota renters rebate and this credit, it ends up being the equivalent of about 2 months worth of rent. So we're paying significantly less than the, I guess, like state average for a one bedroom, which is really good. Look into your state's programs because that's really helpful.
미국도 이렇게 찾아보면은 이렇게 지원금 받을 곳이 많아요.
First, I want to talk about college education, which I think is a con. So education in Korea is expensive, but I personally believe education in the US is more expensive.
Yeah.
College is pretty much a societal requirement here, and the cost increases every year. I'd say yearly college costs are like $20,000 to $50,000. It's extremely unaffordable. However, the public school system here, I think Koreans think of it negatively, right? Maybe you see like bad representation of American public schools on TV.
한국도 강남 8학군이라고 그래가지고 대치동 일가 그쪽 부근의 집값들이 엄청나게 비싸잖아요. 미국도 똑같아요. 저희가 사는 미네소타도 학군 좋은 데는 집값이 막 $1 million 이지. 그래서 미국은 나라도 크고 그 지역마다 다 학군도 다 다르기 때문에 교육 수준이 진짜 완전 바닥인 곳도 있고 완전 좋은 곳도 있어요. 공짜인데도.
But something that I personally like about Minnesota is, yes, there are those areas with like very expensive housing and also really good schools, because we have some of the top public schools in the nation. But there are also schools like mine, which were still very good, very like great education, good facilities, really safe. But still the surrounding housing is affordable. Like for me, my family did not have a lot of money. We couldn't afford a house. We could barely afford our rent and food. Yet I was still able to go to like a really good school, which gave me a great foundation in order to go to college. And I'm really grateful for that. In some other areas of the country, I don't know that I would have been so lucky.
Your mom was really like smart about this, so she chose the great district that has affordable rent.
Exactly. She moved us from, like, you have to know that my small town that I was born and raised in, our school system was absolutely terrible. My parents paid for me to go to a private elementary school, but when my dad died, my mom could not afford that. It's thousands of dollars every year. So she really had to think hard about where to move our family, and yeah, she chose a really good spot. And I still think if we had kids, for example, I would still even move to a similar area and let them go to school there, because I think it's that good. All right, major con of the US is it's necessary to own a car.
Yeah.
Especially in Minnesota, I feel like a car is necessary when we have such extreme weather. You don't want to be biking or walking or taking public transportation. And that's something I really miss about Korea. The public transportation system was so good. You could go anywhere on the subway or the bus or with a cab. Even you wanted me to bike from Seoul to Busan.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't think I can do that. My legs, my body cannot handle that. And
But
you
it's
were
okay, because you can always give up and take a cab or like take a bus.
I was
to
like,
go
so
home.
even in the middle of the countryside, I can just ask for a cab to take me back to Seoul? And he's like, yeah, why not? I mean, that's amazing for Korea. Here, most people have to commute, and their commute is usually not very short. It's probably like 30 minutes to an hour away. I remember when I worked my last like big job in the US, it took me about 30 to 40 minutes to drive. I researched if I could take the bus there. No chance. I would have to still walk like 8 miles a day, like to my job, and 8 miles home. It just doesn't work. So you need a car, and with a car, you also have to pay for your registration, like your car tax. You have to pay for car insurance, and if you can't outright buy your car in cash, you have to have a car payment. These days, they're saying the average car payment for Americans is $500 to $700 per month. Per month.
Yeah, it's so expensive. 그리고 의식주 중에 의를 빼놓을 수가 없죠. 요즘 미국도 옷값이 너무 많이 올라가가지고 새 옷을 사기가 너무 힘들어요. 그래서 저도 거의 코스트코에서 사고 있고 옷을. 그리고 또 더 좋은 점은 미네소타는 옷에 세일즈 텍스가 안 붙어요. 그래서 미국의 다른 주에 거주하는 사람들도 미국 미네소타에 와서 옷을 사가는 경우가 많아요. 그래서 저희는 좀 행운이라고 생각하고 있어요.
So another important topic is crime. We live in one of the lowest crime states in the country. And like, Jin, you've been here for several years. Do you feel safe here?
여기는 심지어 밤에 개를 산책시키는 여자분들도 많을 정도로 그렇게 위험하지 않은 것 같아요. 그리고 한 번도 지금까지 위험했던 순간이 없었던 것 같아요.
I think of course some of that has to do with the fact that I know where like the good places are and where the bad places are. But just in general, Minnesota is pretty safe. And there are some things that I also recommend for you guys. Like we specifically use the app called Citizen. It like gives you live updates about crime happening in your area. For example, when we were in Seattle last time, my Citizen app would like alert me every like 1 or 2 minutes. Gunshots, burglary, theft, car broken into, homeless encampment on fire. But in Minneapolis, we get maybe like 2 or 3 alerts a day, and it'll be like, oh, someone's stuck in an elevator. Oh, there's a car accident. It's not usually anything big.
I think in my opinion, like many Koreans live or travel to bigger cities, such as San Francisco, LA. Like last time we went there, there's so many like cars with broken windows. And like someone like keep looking at us. It looks like that they're gonna like rob our car.
Yeah, we definitely had some people scoping out our rental car when we were in San Francisco. It made us so uncomfortable.
So many like people carrying weapons and stuff.
Oh,
it was super scary.
That was in Seattle. In Seattle, we saw like so much drug use, and like we saw people, carrying weapons, knives, baseball bats with barbed wire on them. And that's not to say that there's no crime here and that there's no like drug abuse here and things like that. But I'd say the scale is significantly less here. So it's a much more like comfortable place for families and just, you know,
to raise kids.
Raise kids, normal daily life here. You can live like more peacefully. This is a major pro for me. Could be a con for Koreans though. I think where we live is just so quiet.
So in Korea we say this. 한국은 재밌는 지옥이지만 미국은 지루한 천국이다.
But to me, I grew up here. I like that it's quiet outside. I like that I don't have to sit in traffic. I like that there's no lines anywhere I go. I like that I don't really have to worry about crowds or anything like that. It's very different, but it could be a pro or con depending on who you are.
그리고 좀 미국은 뭔가 행정 처리나 일 처리가 좀 느려요. 그래서 좀 한적하게 기다려야 되는데, 근데 한국은 막 바로바로 일 처리가 빠르잖아요. 그래서 성질 급한 사람은 저처럼 좀 처음에 적응하기 힘드실 수도 있을 것 같아요.
Additionally, another pro for me is people just don't care in the US. And what I mean by that is nobody cares how you look when you leave the house. Nobody cares what car you drive or the brand of clothing you're wearing. You don't have to wear makeup if you don't want to. Like, just nobody cares about things like that. Oh, nobody cares that we're in a relationship. Jin is Jin. I am me. By default, Jin is a US citizen. Unless he says otherwise, every American will think Jin is a US citizen. He's not a foreigner.
미국에서 영어로 foreigner는 외국인보다는 좀 이방인에 가까운 것 같아요, 개인적인 생각으로. 그래서 외국인이라고 부르지 않는 것 같아요. 한 번도 저한테 외국인이라고 부르는 사람이 없었어요. 지금까지 미국에서 총 6년을 살았는데 저한테 foreigner라고 부르는 사람이 아무도 없었어요.
But in Korea, even if I were a Korean citizen, no matter what I do, I will always be a foreigner.
There are many foreign celebrities say that like I will never become a Korean. They're gonna look at me as a foreigner.
There are some other things that Koreans maybe don't know about in the US. For example, when you go to the doctor's office, if you can't speak English well, the doctor must provide you a translator free of charge in order to communicate appropriately. Also, so many government documents come in many languages. You don't even have to ask. If you just turn the paper over, it's automatically already in Korean, or it'll have a phone number so you can speak to someone in Korean about the document if you don't understand. You might not know about those things if you've never researched or if someone's never told you, but those services are available to you to make your life here more comfortable. All right, and last but not least, I think this one is probably the most important like pro/con for this topic, and that is job opportunities. In Korea, if you're a foreigner like me with my like skill level, even if I spoke fluent Korean and I had like a marriage visa, I would be limited to just a couple of jobs. English teaching, like modeling/entertainment, or tech. actually eliminate tech because I don't have those skills. So I can do English teaching or modeling/entertainment. And personally, I don't want to do those jobs. I have nothing against those jobs. It's just not what I would like to do for my career. And likewise for Jin working in Korea, Koreans themselves have a hard time getting jobs. Korea is so highly competitive. You have to go to the best school and know the best people and have the best credentials to get the good jobs. So like for both of us, it's hard to work in Korea. I still think the US is sort of, they call it the land of opportunity, right? But it really is. Jin and I both here can apply for and be hired for any type of job we want that we're qualified for. And Jin also suits like the US lifestyle well. He understands the culture and he's just, I don't know, he works.
I think that's
fits well
because
here.
I spent my puberty age here. That's probably why.
Yeah. So for us, like we're just so grateful that we have many opportunities here that we maybe wouldn't have in Korea.
Because in Korea we say 국제 couple, like somebody has to sacrifice. But if you live in Korea, you have to sacrifice so much.
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do.
But if we live in the US, I sacrifice this much. So I think that's why I think it's okay for us to live in the US right now currently. I'm not saying you're not gonna live in Korea.
Of course, but we're lucky because we are choosing between two good countries, Korea and the US. They both are so similar. They both have their pros and cons, and no matter which country we end up in, we can be successful as long as we have a positive attitude.
그리고 레이가 저랑 결혼할 때 저한테 한 가지 조건을 제시했는데요. 자기는 엄마가 아프니까 미국으로 돌아가서 엄마를 보살펴야 된다. 그래가지고 저희가 그 미국에 갈 준비를 거의 2년 동안 했어요. 미국은 일 처리가 느리니까. 근데 저희가 여기 모시러 와 여기 바로 직전에 장모님이 돌아가셔가지고 저희가 여기 온 가장 큰 이유 중 하나가 없어졌는데 그래도 이왕 저희가 여기 왔으니까 아메리칸 드림을 이렇게 이루려고 한번 노력을 해보겠습니다. 그냥 사나이가 한번 칼을 뽑았는데 무라도 썰어야 될 거 아니에요. So in Korea there's a saying, if a manly man pull out their sword, he should at least cut the radish.
So you're saying that because we moved here, we should at least try?
I should at least cut the radish.
I mean, it's true. We put in a lot of effort, years, money, time, everything into coming here, and I feel like we're just getting started. So we're gonna give it a shot here. But people always ask us in our comments, like, when are you guys gonna move back to Korea? I think for now,
we should at least cut our radish first.
Yeah,
and then
we're gonna work on our
think about
goals
it later.
here. We're gonna try our best here, and you guys in our comments too. If you are living in Korea, I want to know the pros and cons from your perspective. Or if you're living in the US, what are the pros and cons from your perspective? If you've lived in both countries, tell us the pros and cons of that experience, because I think there's a lot that we can learn from each other, and I want to continue this discussion down in the comments. So please leave many interesting things down there, okay? But this video is way too long. So I think we should cut it here. And we'll see you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.